Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video we're going to be looking at the importance and variability of snow cover, and it's certainly not something that I'd really thought about before, but I ended up reading a report or study from I think it's the Northern Institute of Boreal Studies from the University of Alberta. They translated a study that was actually done in Russia in the mid 1900s. But either way, it's still kind of valid information because that's a boreal ecosystem similar to the one I'm in here, which is in the foothills of Southern Alberta. So I just wanted to show kind of how different the areas of snow cover really are, and maybe what we'll do is we'll take a few measurements. Right now I'm standing in a clear cut, and this will kind of stand in for what you might see on higher altitudes at or near the tree line or above, where the wind is moving the snow. So we'll kind of use this as a stand-in for that, a little easier to get to, I guess. And just like we'll maybe talk a little bit about how these areas with varying amounts of snow cover affect the animals that live there. And that's the part that I really found interesting in the study, is that it is a very specific needs of each type of animal. Some benefit from more snow cover, others benefit from less snow cover. The trees in certain ways benefit and don't benefit. Same sort of idea. The kind of one of the defining factors for the trees and the subsoils is that the snow cover, the thicker it is, the fluffier it is, the more insulating capacity it has. I believe it's 20 times more than ice. So if it hasn't been compressed, it's going to insulate the ground very well. Even in an area like this, it may not freeze deeply in an area of deep snow cover, but areas that are blown clean or in with a heavy tree canopy, they may freeze very deeply. So that's going to affect the microbial kind of life in the soils there. But I haven't really been able to find a study or report on like any sort of in-depth reporting or whatever on what lives in the soil and how that affects it, if it affects it at all. So that's more speculation on my part. But anyway, so we'll get started here. We're going to do some measurements just by throwing a tape measure in, kind of seeing like what kind of snow cover here. This has been blown clean, not clean, but much of the snow is blown off. This is, I would suggest, the reason I'm doing this in March, early March, is this is kind of peak snow cover in this area. Many areas in North America and Europe, this is already spring, but definitely not so here. So this would be, March is the snowiest month of the year in this area. We do get stronger sun, melts it fast. However, it still is building at this point, and this may be kind of the peak of that of the snow kind of pack in this area. And this year it seems like a very average snowpack, maybe slightly above, certainly within normal parameters. So kind of a good time of year and a good year to do this, so we can kind of have a look and see what we find out. Okay, so I've dug down a little bit here just to get the tape measure on as much kind of the bottom of the snowpack as possible. So this area is pretty consistent. It's about 6 inches or 15 centimeters or so, and that is pretty shallow depth. What we would assume is that animals that dig down for food, for feeding, would be able to do that in this area. Fairly easy to walk through. for both me, and I'm kind of using my dogs as a bit of a gauge for how easy certain things would be able to walk through there. Like, you know, predators would avoid areas of really deep snow cover. They would find it hard to move in there. Deer, moose, those types of things. Moose would take quite a bit of snow cover to really negatively affect them. However, they would certainly avoid areas of very deep snow. This is not one of them. This, I would assume, would be very easy for those animals to get to the bottom of the snow cover. One of the things that we could mention here is some of the animals that depend on a deep snow cover would be the ones that, say, the voles and mice, those types of things that would make tunnels and live between the snow cover and the ground. And those animals would find it easier to, and there would be less predation on them with deeper snow cover. So things like foxes and coyotes, and maybe to some extent wolves, would have a harder time finding and hunting them if the snow is too deep. So certain things benefit, certain things don't. This area here looks to be pretty consistent around that 6-inch mark. But we're going to go to the other side of this ridge where this snow that is blown off this area has deposited, and it's a very different story there. Walking in here through it, it was quite deep. The dogs were struggling and not enjoying themselves through it. So we'll see what that's like. All right, here we are in another area just off the kind of the lee side of the area that we were just in, the wind kind of swept area. And you can see we have somewhere around 20, 21 inches, 52, 53 centimeters, somewhere in that range in this spot. This area is pretty heavily affected by wind. This is the area that we filmed earlier, maybe last year, in just about after a storm, and you can see all the damage of the trees here. So pretty deep snow to walk through. Like I said, the dogs that I have here, good to kind of experiment to see how they can move through it, and they're having a lot of trouble. You can see there, he's not too happy to be moving around in the snow. However, I think that this is fairly good evidence that a lot of animals might avoid this area, not only because of all the downed trees, but because of the depth of snow. It would be difficult to feed, and there's probably not much reason to kind of go in here. And I don't really see a lot of animal tracks in the area, although I would imagine things like squirrels and those types of things may feed on some of the downed pine cones. They wouldn't necessarily be as affected. They'd be able to skip right across the snow in this area. So, all right, well, next we're going to go to kind of a southern slope, and it won't be necessarily wind affected, but more sun affected. So we'll see what that does. Okay, so here we are in a southern facing slope, and we have anywhere from 3 or 4 inches, 9-10 centimeters, something like that, to 0 snow. So this area the snow would melt. It's subject to kind of warm periods interspersed with snow, and then very cold, then warm. It kind of cycles like that through the winter. So this area has very little snow cover, and then as we move into the kind of clear cut there, the snow cover grows a little bit. So these southern areas, I'm assuming they would freeze pretty hard and pretty deep in those cold spells because there's no insulation. However, they would also warm up faster in the spring, and these trees would certainly start growing faster or earlier, have a longer season than something in a north facing area where it's frozen more for longer in the year. So There you have it. There's the southern facing slope. And next we're going to go to kind of a pretty heavily forested area with a pretty thick canopy above. And we're going to look at, does snow gather in the trees where wind's not a factor, or is there more or less snow? So let's have a look. Okay, so here we have an area that is north facing, not necessarily terribly wind affected, at least on the ground, and fairly even snow cover, although under some of the trees there's even kind of less, but here we are in between a couple of trees. We're going to dig a little spot and see what we find here. All right, so we have somewhere around 7 inches or so, and that's 18 centimeters, something like that. And it goes from areas like that to even a little less. Like I said, under some of the larger trees, there's a little less. And I guess it's commonly thought, at least from what I hear, is that a lot of people say, oh, in the trees there's a lot of snow. But what I'm finding is that's not necessarily the case. So in the trees, the snow tends to sit on the, especially in a coniferous forest like this, the snow sits on the branches and often evaporates, melts, that type of thing. So much less snow, in the form of snow anyway, often it drips down, but is actually hitting the ground. And in this area, I see a lot of signs of deer using it, likely due to that manageable snow cover and snow thickness. And clearly they're finding something to eat in here. But this is a mature forest, and in areas like this, I definitely see a lot more signs of wildlife. So we're going to check out something that's fairly common in the area to see. It's kind of where deer has bedded down for the evening or for a certain period of time. We'll have a look. Okay, we're just a short distance away from where we were filming before, and here we have an area where a deer's been resting, and I see these everywhere. We know it's a deer because of the tracks all around. There's scat here, and one of the interesting things about deer is their pointy hooves. They really penetrate deep into the snowpack, so they have really no ability to walk on top. So that may be part of the reason why we see them where we see them in the winter. And you can see these tracks certainly penetrate almost to the bottom of the snowpack, and these are pretty common in areas that I see them commonly in areas of mature forest, heavy canopy, little wind action, that type of thing. This is where they like to spend some time, I guess. And obviously they're finding enough to eat. So, and we're going to look at another type of area. Kind of the final area is like, it's a clearing in a forest that's not wind affected. It has, generally they'll have the kind of a deep snowpack, fluffy snow, not necessarily sun affected, this type of thing. So we're going to see what that shows us, and yeah, that'll be it. Okay, so we are in kind of a forested area with a small clearing that's not terribly affected by sun or wind, and we're going to measure here. It's quite deep, and looks like we have around 26 inches or 66 centimeters. So what that tells us is that this is not only the deepest snow that we found so far, it's kind of telling that there's no footprints from animals here. There's not a lot of activity above the snow. This is soft snow, anything here would essentially sink right in. But it just goes to show how variable the snow cover is in an area such as this that we've been walking around. All these sites have been very close, within a kilometer of each other. Tried to keep it so that they're, we're comparing apples to apples in a way. So yeah, that says a lot about what animals kind of live and feed in what areas and why. And some animals are very well adapted, like an example is the woodland or mountain caribou, I should say. They have very wide splayed feet that can deal with this type of snowpack. They're feeding on lichen, bryophytes, and things like that in the trees, so they need kind of undisturbed, mature or old growth forest to live. And they prefer those areas, at least in part, because the wolves, their main predator, find it really hard to kind of move in areas with this kind of snow. So anyway, interesting kind of look at how variable it is and how complex it makes these ecosystems. There's a lot more to kind of discover about it, but that's at least a preliminary quick look at the differences that the snowpack kind of makes, and how variable it is. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.